Good afternoon, everybody. No Friday intro today because it was taken off last time, so it didn't get put back on. Um, Sorry about that. Maybe next Friday there will be an intro. Um, I know we forgot the intro. And also, this lamp is like right here in the way, but it's because I need to read. So I need to see what I'm reading. So today is the continuation of the difference engine. So we'll just pick it up right where we left off last week. And just to recap, Sybil has sort of been convinced by one of her father's followers from the past. Her father, of course, is dead. He was, I guess, killed by the state for his sort of anarchist viewpoints, I guess. But one of the followers, somebody that really looks up to her father, found his daughter, Sybil, and she was perfectly fine in the life that she had chosen for herself. Pretty obscure. She was even using a different name. And he said, I don't think that's good enough for you. I think you should be making a difference, especially given who your father was and how influential he is. So she's sort of taken up with this man, and and so at this point, they're at a singing hall or a club where she used to perform years ago. And so a lot of these memories are recurring for her about her past life. And so that's kind of where we are. So what I'll do is I'll just pick it up from where we left off, which was we got about 23 or so pages into the book. So we'll see how far we get today, and then we'll move on. So let's see. The guy's name is Mick. So Mick thumped his chest. But that don't mean that you and I are out in the cold and lonely. It only means we have to think faster with our eyes peeled and our ears open. Mick struck a prize fighter's pose, elbows bent, fists poised, knuckles up before his face. Then he flung his hair back and grinned at her. Let me put this up so you guys can see the book cover. Well, that's all very well for you, Sybil protested. You can do as you like. You were one of my father's followers. Well, there were many such, and some are in Parliament now. But fallen women get ruined, do you see? Ruined, and stay that way. Mick straightened, frowning at her. Now, that's exactly what I mean. You're running with the flash mob now, but thinking like a trollop. There's no one knows who you are. In Paris, the cops and bosses have your number here, true enough, but numbers are only that. And your file's no more than a simple stack of cards. For them, as you know, there's ways to change a number. And he sneered to see her surprise. It ain't done easy here in London, I grant you. But affairs run differently in the Paris of Louis Napoleon. Affairs run fast and loose in Flash Paris, especially for an adventuress with a blamy tongue and a pretty ankle. Sybil bit her knuckle. Her eyes burned suddenly. It was acrid smoke from the limelight and fear. A new number in the government's machines. That would mean a new life. Let me move this light over. I'm tired of reading this way. I want to read over here. Okay. A new number in the government's machines, and that would mean a new life, a life without a past. The unexpected thought of such freedom terrified her, not so much for what it meant in itself, though that was strange and dazzling enough, but for what Mick Radley might demand for such a thing in fair exchange. Truly, you could change my number? I can buy you a new one in Paris, pass you off for French or an Argy or an American refugee girl. Mick folded his elegant arms. I promise nothing, mind you. You'll have to earn it. You wouldn't gull me, Mick, she said slowly, because I could really and specially sweet to a fellow who could do me with such a great service. Mick jammed his hands in his pockets, rocking back on his heels, looking at her. Could you now? He said softly. Her trembling words had fanned something inside him, and she could see it in his eyes, as eager, lustful kindling, something she dimly knew was there, a need he had to slip his fishhooks deeper into her. I could if you treated me fair and level as your apprentice adventuress, and not some cakey dollymop to gull and cast aside. And Sybil felt tears coming, harder this time. She blinked and looked up boldly and let them flow, thinking perhaps they might do some good. You could raise my hopes and dash them, would you? That would be low and cruel. If you did that, I'd jump off Tower Bridge. He looked her in the eye. But that sniffling girl bar that sniffling girl and listen close to me and understand this. You're not just mix, pretty bit of something. I may have a taste for that as any man, but I can get that where I like and don't need you just for that. I need the blamey skill and the daring pluck that was Mr. Walter Gerard's. You're to be my apprentice, Sybil, and I your master, and let that be how things stand with us. You'll be loyal, obedient, and truthful to me, no subterfuge and no impertinence, and in return, I'll teach you craft and keep you well, and you'll find me as kind and generous as you are loyal and true. Do I make myself clear? Yes, Mick. We have a pact then? Yes, Mick, she smiled at him. Well and good, he said. Then kneel here and put your hands together. So he joined his hands in prayer and make this oath that you, Sybil Gerard, do swear by saints and angels, by powers, dominions, and thrones, by seraphim and cherubim, and the all-seeing eye, to obey Michael Radley and serve him faithfully, so help you God. Do you so swear? And she stared at him in dismay. Must I really? Yes. But isn't it a great sin to make such an oath to a man who, I mean to say, we're not in holy wedlock? Well, that's a marriage vow, he said impatiently, and this is apprentice oath. She saw no alternative. Tugging her skirts back, she knelt before him on cold, gritty stone. Do you so swear? I do, so help me God. Don't look so glum, he said, helping her to her feet. That's a mild and womanly oath you swore, compared to some. He pulled her to her feet. Let it brace you, should you have doubts or disloyal thoughts. Now take this. He handed her the guttering candle and hunt up that gin soak of a stage manager and tell him I want the boilers fired. Sorry. They dined that evening in the Argyle Rooms, a Haymarket resort not far from Lawrence Dancing Academy. The Argyle had private supper rooms in which the indiscreet might spend an entire night. Sybil was mystified by the choice of a private room. Mick was certainly not ashamed to be seen with her in public. Midway through the lamb, however, the waiter admitted a stout little gentleman with pomaded red hair and a gold chain across a taut velvet waistcoat. He was round and plush as a child's doll. Hello, Corny, Mick said, without bothering to put down his knife and fork. Evening, Mick, the man said with the curiously unplaceable accent of an actor or a provincial long in service to the city gentry. I was told you'd need of me. And told correctly, Corny. Mick neither offered to introduce Sybil nor asked the man to sit, and she began to feel quite uncomfortable. 'Tis a brief part, so you should have little trouble remembering your lines. Mick produced a plain envelope from his coat and handed it to the man. Your lines, your cue, and your retainer. The Garrick, Saturday night. The man smiled mirthlessly as he accepted the envelope. Quite some time since I played the Garrick, Mick. He winked at Sybil and took his leave with no more formality than that. Who's that? Sybil asked. Mick had returned to his lamb and was spooning mint sauce from a pewter serving pot. An actor of parts, Mick said. He'll play opposite you in the Garrick during Houston's speech. And Sybil was baffled. Play? Opposite me? Well, you're an apprentice adventuress, don't forget. You can expect to be called on to play many roles, Sybil. A political speech can always benefit from a bit of sweetening. Sweetening? Never mind. He seemed to lose interest in his lamb and pushed his plate aside. Plenty of time for rehearsal tomorrow. I have something to show you now. He rose from the table, crossed to the door, and bolted it secretly. Returning, he lifted the proofed canvas portmanteau from the carpet beside his chair and placed it before her on the Argylls' clean but much mended linen. She'd been curious about the portmanteau, not curious that he'd carried it with him from the Garrick's pit, first to the printers to examine the handbills for Houston's lecture, then on to the Argyll rooms, but because it was of such cheap stuff, nothing at all like the gear he so obviously prided himself on. Now, why should Dandy Mick choose to carry about a bag of that sort when he could afford some flash confection from Aaron's or nickel clasps or silk woven in Ada checkers? And she knew that the black bag no longer contained the Keno cards for the lecture because he'd wrapped those carefully in sheets of the Times and hidden them again behind the stage mirror. Mick undid the wretched tin clasps, opened the bag, and lifted out a long, narrow case of polished rosewood, its corners trimmed with bright brass. Sybil wondered if it might contain a telescope, but she'd seen boxes of this sort in the window of a firm of Oxford Street instrument makers. Mick handled it with a caution that was very nearly comical, like some papist called upon to move the dust of a dead pope. Caught up in the sudden mood of childlike anticipation, she forgot the man called Corny and Mick's worrying talk about playing opposite him at the Garrick. There was something of the magician about Mick now. As he placed the gleaming rosewood case on the tablecloth, she almost expected him to furl back his cuffs. Nothing here, you see, and nothing here. His thumbs swung tiny brass hooks from a pair of miniature eyelets, and he paused for effect. Sybil found that she was holding her breath. Had he brought a gift for her? Some token of her new status? Something to secretly mark her as his apprentice adventuress? Mick lifted the rosewood lid and its sharp brass corners. It was filled with playing cards, stuffed end to end with them, a score of decks at the least, and Sybil's heart fell. You've seen nothing like this before, he said. I can assure you of that. Mick pinched out the card nearest his right hand and displayed it for her. Nope, not a playing card, though near enough in size. It was made of some strange milky substance that was neither paper nor glass and very thin and glossy. Mick flexed it lightly between thumb and forefinger. It bent easily but sprang rigid again as he released it. It was perforated with perhaps 3 dozen tightly spaced rows of circular holes, and holes no larger than those in a good pearl button. 3 of its corners were slightly rounded, while the 4th was trimmed off at an angle, and near the trimmed corner someone had written number I in faint mauve ink. Camphorated cellulose, Mick declared, the devil's own stuff should it touch fire, but not else will serve the finer functions of the Napoleon. Napoleon? Sybil was lost. Is it a sort of Keno card, Mick? He beamed at her, delighted. She seemed to have said the right thing. Have you never heard of the great Napoleon Ordinateur, the mightiest engine of the French Academy? The London police engines are mere toys beside it. Sybil pretended to study the contents of the box, knowing it would please Mick. But it was merely a wooden box, quite handsomely made, lined with the green baize that covered billiard tables. It contained a very large quantity of the slick, milky cards, perhaps several hundred. Tell me what this is about. He laughed, quite happily it seemed, and bent suddenly to kiss her mouth. In time, he straightened, reinserted the card, lowered the lid, clicked the brass hooks into place. Every brotherhood has its mysteries. Dandy Mick's best guess is that nobody knows quite what it means to run this little stack. It would demonstrate a certain matter, prove a certain nested series of mathematical hypotheses, all manners, quite arcane. And by the by, it would make the name of Michael Radley shine like the very heavens in the clacking confraternity. He winked. The French clackers have their own brotherhoods, you know. Les Filles de Vaucanson, they call themselves the Jacquardine Society. We'll be showing these onion eaters a thing or two. He seemed drunk to her now, though she knew he'd only had those 2 little bottles of ale. So she was intoxicated by the idea of the cards in the box, whatever they might be. This box and its contents are quite extraordinarily dear, Sybil. He seated himself again and rummaged in the cheap black bag. It yielded a folded sheet of stout brown paper, an ordinary pair of stationery shears, a roll of strong green twine. As Mick spoke, he unfolded the paper and began to wrap the box in it. Very dear. Traveling with the general exposes a man to certain dangers. We're off to Paris after the lecture, but tomorrow morning you'll be taking this round to the post office in Great Portland Street. Done with wrapping, he wound twine around the paper. Nip this for me with the shears. She did as he asked. Now put your finger here. He executed a perfect knot. You'll be posting our parcel to Paris. Poste restante. Do you know what that means? It means the parcel is held for the addressee. Mick nodded, took a stack of scarlet scaling wax from one trouser pocket, his repeating match from the other. The match struck on the first try. Yes, held there in Paris for us, safe as houses. The wax darkened and slid in the oily flame. Scarlet droplets spattered the green knot, the brown paper, and he tossed the shears and the roll of twine back into the portmanteau, pocketed the wax and the match, withdrew his reservoir pen, and began to address the parcel. But what is it? How can you know its value if you have no idea what it does? No, I didn't say that, did I? I've my ideas, don't I? Dandy Mick always has his ideas. I have enough and above an idea to take the original up to Manchester with me on the general's business. I have enough of an idea to pump the canniest clackers for their latest compression techniques, and enough of the general's capital to commission the result on Napoleon Gouge cellulose. It might have been Greek for all it meant to her. A knock came. An evil-looking servant boy, crop-headed and snuffling, wheeled in a trolley and cleared the plates. He made a botch of it, lingering as if expecting a gratuity, but Mick ignored him and stared coldly into space, now and then grinning to himself like a cat. The boy left with a sneer. At length there came the rap of a cane against the door, and a second of Mick's friends had arrived. This was a heavyset man of quite astonishing ugliness, pop-eyed and blue-jowled, his squat, sloping forehead fringed in an oiled parody of the elegant spit curls the Prime Minister favored. The stranger wore new and well-cut evening dress with cloak, cane, and top hat, a fancy pearl in his cravat, and a gold Masonic ring on one finger. His face and neck were deeply sunburnt. Mick rose at once from his chair, shook the ringed hand, and offered a seat. You keep late hours, Mr. Radley, the stranger said. We do what we can to accommodate your special needs, Professor Rudwick. The ugly gentleman settled in his chair with a sharp wooden squeak. His bulging eyes shot Sybil a speculative look. Then, and for one heart-leaping moment, she feared the worst, that it had all been a gull and she was about to become part of some dreadful transaction between them. But Rudwood looked away to Mick. I won't conceal from you, sir, my eagerness to resume my activities in Texas. He pursed his lips. He had small, grayish, pebble-like teeth and a great slash of a mouth. This business of playing the London social lion is a deuced bore. President Houston will grant you an audience tomorrow at 2, if that's agreeable. And Rudwick grunted, perfectly. Mick nodded. The fame of your Texian discovery seems to grow by the day, sir. I understand that Lord Babbage himself has taken an interest. We have worked together at the Institute at Cambridge, Rudwick admitted, unable to hide a smirk of satisfaction. The theory of pneumodynamics. Well, as it happens, Mick remarked, I find myself in possession of a clacking sequence that may assume his lordship. or that may amuse his lordship. Sorry, slightly dyslexic there. Rudwick seemed nettled by this news. Amuse him, sir? Lord Babbage is a most irascible man. Lady Ada was kind enough to favor me in my initial efforts. Favor you, said Rudwick with a sudden ugly laugh. Is it some gambling system then? It had best be, if you hope to catch her eye. Not at all, Mick said shortly. Her ladyship chooses odd friends, Rudwick opined, with a long, sullen look at Mick. Do you know a man named Collins, a so-called odds maker? Haven't had the pleasure, Mick said. The fellow's on her like a louse in a bitch's ear, Rudwick said, his sunburnt face flushing. Fellow made me the most astounding proposition. And, Mick said delicately. Rudwick frowned. I did fancy you might know him. He seems the sort that might well run in your circles. No, sir. Rudwick leaned forward. And what of another certain gent, Mr. Radley, very long of limb and cold of eye, who I fancy has been dogging my movements of late? Would he, perhaps, be an agent of your President Houston? Seemed to have a Texian air about him. My president is fortunate in the quality of his agents. Rudwick stood, his face dark. You'll be so kind, I'm sure, as to request the bastard to cease and desist. Mick rose as well, smiling sweetly. I'll certainly convey your sentiments to my employer, Professor, but I fear I keep you from your night's amusements. He walked to the door, opened it, shut it on Rudwick's broad, well-tailored back. Mick turned and winked at Sybil. He's off to the ratting pits. A very low sporting gentleman, our beloved, learned Professor Rudwick. Speaks his bloody mind, though, don't he? He paused. The general will like him. Hours later, she woke in Grand's in bed beside him to the click of his match and the sweet reek of his cigar. He had her twice on the chaise behind their table in the Argyll rooms, and once again in Grand's. She'd not known him to be so ardent before. She found it encouraging, though the third go had made her a little sore down there. The room was dark, save for the spill of gaslight past the curtains. She moved a bit closer to him. Where would you like to go, Sybil? After France. She'd never considered the question. With you, Mick. He chuckled and slid his hand beneath the bedclothes, his fingers closing around the mound of her womanhood. Where shall we go then, Mick? Go with me, and you'll go first to Mexico, then north for the liberation of Texas with a Franco-Mexican army under the command of General Houston. But isn't Texas a frightfully queer place? Quit thinking like a Whitechapel drab. All the world's queer, seen from Piccadilly. Sam Houston had himself a bloody palace in Texas, and before the Texian threw him into exile, he was Britain's greatest ally in the American West. You and I, why, we would live like grandees in Texas and build a manor by some river. Would they truly let us do that, Mick? Her Majesty's government, you mean? Perfidious Albion? Mick chuckled. Well, that largely depends on British public opinion toward General Houston. We're doing all we can to sweeten his reputation here in Britain. That's why he's on his lecture tour, isn't it? I see, said Sybil. Well, you're very clever, Mick. Deep matters, Sybil. Balance of power. It worked for Britain and Europe for 500 years, and it works even better in America. Union, Confederacy, Republic of Texas, and California. They all take a turn in British favor until they get too bold and a bit too independent, and then they're taken down a peg. Divide and rule, dear. The coal end of Mick's cigar glowed in the darkness. If it weren't for British diplomacy and British power, America might be all one huge nation. What about your friend, the general? Will he truly help us? Well, that's the beauty of it, Mick declared. The diplomats thought Sam Houston was a bit stiff-necked and didn't care for some of his actions and policies and didn't back him as strongly as they should have. But the Texian junta that replaced him is far worse. They're openly hostile to British interests. Their days are numbered. The general has had to cool his heels a bit in exile here in England, but now he's on his way back to Texas for what's his by right. He shrugged. Should have happened a few years ago. Our trouble is that Her Majesty's government don't know their own mind. There's factions among them. Some don't trust Sam Houston, but the French will help us anyhow. Their Mexican clients have a border war with the Texians, and they need the general. So you're going to war then, Mick? She found it difficult to imagine Dandy Mick leading a cavalry charge. Coup d'etat, more like, he assured her. We won't see much bloodshed. I'm Houston's political man, you see. And his man I'll stay, for I'm the one's arranged this London speaking tour and on to France, and I'm the one's made certain approach has resulted in him being granted his audience with the French emperor. But could that be true, really? And I'm the one as runs Manchester's newest and best through the kino for him, sweetens the press and British public opinion, hires the bull stickers. He sounds like propaganda. He drew on his cigar, his fingers kneading her there, and she heard him puff out a great, satisfied cloud of cherry smoke. But he mustn't have felt like doing it again, not then, because she was soon asleep and dreaming of Texas, a Texas of rolling downs, contented sheep, and the windows of gray manors glinting in late afternoon sunlight. Let me get some water. Hope you guys are enjoying it so far. There's a few people listening. Sybil sat in on an aisle seat, third row back in the garret, thinking unhappily that General Sam Houston, late of Texas, was not drawing much of a crowd. People were filtering in as the five-man orchestra squeaked and sawed and honked. A family party was settling in the row before her, 2 boys in blue jackets and trousers with laid-down shirt collars, a little girl in a shawl and a braided frock, then 2 more little girls, ushered in by their governesses, a thin-looking sort, with a hooked nose and watery eyes, sniffling into her handkerchief. Well, one governess. Then the oldest boy sauntering in, a sneer on his face. Then Papa with dress coat and cane and whiskers, and Fat Mama with long ringlets and big nasty hat, 3 gold rings on her plump soft fingers. Finally, all were seated amid of shoveling coats and shawls and a munching of candied orange peel, quite patently well-behaved and expecting improvement, clean and soaped and prosperous in their snug, machine-made clothes. A clerky fellow with spectacles took the seat next to Sybil's, an inch wide blue strip showing at his hairline where he'd shaved his forehead to suggest intellect. He was reading Mick's program and sucking an acidulated lemon drop. And past him, a trio of officers on furlough from the Crimea, looking very pleased with themselves, come to hear about an old-fashioned war in Texas, fought the old-fashioned way. There were other soldiers speckled through the crowd, bright in their red coats, the respectable sort, who didn't go for drabs and gin, but would take the Queen's pay and learn gunnery arithmetic and come back to work in the railroads and shipyards and better themselves. The place was full of bettering blokes, really, shopkeepers and store clerks and druggists with their tidy wives and broods. And in her father's days, such people, Whitechapel people, had been angry and lean and shabby, with sticks in their hands and dirks in their belts. But times had changed under the Rads, and now even Whitechapel had its tight-laced, scrub-faced women and its cakey clock-watching men who read the Dictionary of Useful Knowledge and the Journal of Moral Improvement and looked to get ahead. Then the gaslights guttered in their copper rings, and the orchestra strung into a flat rendition of Come to the Bower, and with a huff, the limelight flared, the curtain drew back before the kinotrope screen, the music covering the clicking of kino bits, spinning themselves into place. Broken frills and furbelows grew like black frost on the edges of the screen. They framed tall letters in a fancy alphabet of sharp-edged engine Gothic, black against white. Editions, Panoptique, Presents, and below the kinotrope, Houston entered stage left, a bulky, shabby figure, limping toward the podium at the center of the stage. He was drowned in dimness for the moment below the raw and focused glare of Mick's limelight. Sybil watched him closely, curious about him and wary. Her first glimpse of Mick's employer. She'd seen enough American refugees in London to have ideas about them. The Unionists dressed much like normal Britons if they had the money for it, while Confederates tended to dress rather gaudy and flash, but peculiar, not quite proper, to judge by Houston. The Texians were an even queerer and madder lot. He was a big man, red-faced and beefy, over 6 feet tall in his heavy boots, his broad shoulders draped in a long, coarse woven blanket, rather like a mantelet, but barbarically striped, red and black and umber. It swept the Garrick stage like a tragedy. He had a thick mahogany cane in his right hand, and he swung it lightly now as if he didn't need it. But his legs shook, Sybil saw, and the gold fringe trembled on the fancy seams of his trousers. Now he mounted to the darkened podium, wiped his nose, sipped at a glass of something that plainly wasn't water, and above his head the kenotrop shuffled into a colored image, the Lion of Great Britain and a sort of long-horned bull. The animals fraternized beneath small crossed banners, the Union Jack and the single-starred flag of Texas, both bright in red and white and blue, and Houston was adjusting something behind his podium, a small stage mirror, Sybil guessed, so he could check the kenotrope behind him as he spoke and not lose his place. The kenotrope went to black and white again, the screen's bits flickering, row by row, like falling dominoes. A portrait bust appeared in shaded, jagged lines, high, balding forehead, heavy brows, thick nose bracketed by bristling cheek whiskers that hid the ears. The thin mouth was set firmly, the cleft chin upraised. Then below the bust, the words, General Sam Houston. A second limelight flared, catching Houston at the podium, flinging him into sudden bright relief before the audience. Sybil clapped hard. She was the last to finish. Thank you very kindly, ladies and gentlemen of London, Houston said. He had the deep, booming voice of a practiced orator, marred by a foreign drawl. You do a stranger great honor. Houston looked across the seats of the Garrick. I see we have many gentlemen of Her Majesty's military in the audience tonight. He shrugged the blanket back a bit, and the limelight glittered harshly from the metals clinging to his coat. Your professional interest is very gratifying, sirs. In the row before Sybil, the children were fidgeting. A little girl squealed in pain as one of her brothers punched her. And I see we have a future British fighter here as well. There was a ripple of surprised laughter. Houston checked his mirror quickly, then leaned over his podium, his heavy brows knitting in grandfatherly charm. What's your name, son? The wicked boy sat bolt upright. Billy, sir, he squeaked. Billy, William Greenacre, sir. Houston nodded gravely. Tell me, Master Greenacre, would you like to run away from home and live with red Indians? Oh, yes, sir, the boy blunted, and then, oh, no, sir. The audience laughed again. When I was about your age, young William, I was a lad of spirit, like yourself, and that was the very course of action I pursued. The keno shuffled behind the general's head, and a colored map appeared, outlines of the various states of America, oddly shaped provinces with confusing names. Houston checked his mirror and spoke rapidly. I was born in the American state of Tennessee. My family was of the Scottish gentry, though times were hard for us on our little frontier farm, and though I was born an American, I felt little allegiance to the Yankee government in far Washington. The kenotrope displayed the portrait of an American savage, a mad-eyed, staring creature hung with feathers, cheeks streaked with keno blocks of war paint. Just across the river, Houston said, lived the mighty nation of the Cherokee, a simple folk of natural nobility. I found this suited me far better than a life with my American neighbors. Alas, for their souls were pinched by the greed for dollars. Houston shook his head a bit before his British audience. pained at his own illusion to be an American national failing. He had their sympathy, Sybil thought. The Cherokees won my heart, Houston continued, and I ran from home to join them with nothing, ladies and gentlemen, but the buckskin coat on my back and Homer's noble tale of the Iliad in my pocket. The kenotrope shuffled itself bottom to top, producing an image from a Grecian urn, a warrior with a crested helmet, his spear upraised. He bore a round shield with the emblem of a raven and wings outspread. There was a light pattering of impressed applause, which Houston accepted, nodding modestly as if it were meant for him. As a child of the American frontier, he said, I can't claim to have had much fine schooling, although in later life I passed the bar and led a nation. As a youth, however, I sought my education in an ancient school. I committed every line of the blind bard's book to memory. He lifted the metal-strewn lapel off his coat, left-handed. The heart within this scarred breast, he said, and thumped it, still stirs to that noblest of stories, and its tales of a valor to challenge the very gods, and of unstained martial honor that endures till death. He waited for applause. At length it came, though not as warmly as he seemed to expect. I saw no contradiction in the lives of Homer's heroes and those of my beloved Cherokee, Houston persisted. Behind him, the Greek's javelin sprouted the dangling feathers of a hunting spear, and war paint daubed his face. Houston peered at his notes. Together we hunted bear and deer and boar, fished the limpid stream and raised the yellow corn. Around the campfire, under open skies, I told my savage brothers of the moral lessons that my youthful heart had gleaned from Homer's words. Because of this, they gave me the red man's name of Raven, after the feathered spirit that they deem the wisest of birds. The Greek dissolved, giving way to a grander raven, its wings spread stiffly across the screen, its chest covered by a striped shield. Sybil recognized it. It was the American eagle, symbol of the Sundered Union, but the white-headed Yankee bird had become Houston's black crow. It was clever, she decided, perhaps more clever than it was worth. For two of the kenotrope bits in the screen's upper left corner had jammed on their spindles, showing dots of leftover blue, a tiny fault, but annoying, all out of proportion, like a bit of dust in one's eye. Mick's fancy clacking was working the Garrick's keno very hard. And distracted, Sybil had lost the thread of Houston's speech. The brazen cry of the battle trumpet in the camp of the Tennessee Volunteers. Another keno portrait appeared. A man who looked rather like Houston, but with a tall shock of hair in front and hollow cheeks, identified by caption as General Andrew Jackson. There was a hiss of breath here and there, led by the soldiers perhaps, and the crowd stirred. Some Britons still remember Hickory Jackson without fondness. To hear Houston call it, Jackson had also bravely fought against Indians and even been president of America for a time, but all that meant little here. Houston praised Jackson as his patron and mentor, an honest soldier of the people who valued a man's true inner worth above the tinsel of wealth or show, but the applause for this sentiment was grudging at best. Now another scene appeared, some kind of rude frontier fort. Houston narrated a tale of siege from his early military career, where he'd fought a campaign under Jackson against the Indians called Creek, but he seemed to have lost his natural audience, the soldiers. For the three Crimea veterans in Sybil's row were still muttering angrily about Hickory Jackson. The damn war was over before New Orleans. Suddenly, the limelight flashed blood red. Mick was busy beneath the stage, a tinted glass filter, the sudden booming of a kettle drum as little keno cannons cracked gunpowder white around the fort, and single-bit flickers of red cannon shell arched rapidly across the screen. Night after night, we heard the Creek fanatics howling their eerie death songs. Houston shouted, a pillar of glare beneath the screen. The situation demanded a direct assault with cold steel. It was said to be certain death to charge that gate, but I was not a Tennessee volunteer for nothing. It's a show. A tiny, like everything, right? About this country. A tiny figure dashed toward the fort, no more than a few black squares, a wriggling block of bits, and the entire stage went black. There was surprised applause in the sudden darkness. The penny boys up in the Greeks gallery whistled shrilly. Then limelight framed Houston again. He began to boast about his wounds: 2 bullets in the arm, a knife stab in the leg, an arrow into his belly. Houston didn't say the vulgar word, but he did rub the area lingeringly as if he were dyspeptic. He'd lain all night on the battlefield, he claimed, and then been hauled for days through wilderness on a supply cart, bleeding, raving, and sick with swamp fever. The clerky cove next to Sybil took another lemon drop and looked at his pocket watch. He's bored. Now a 5-pointed star appeared slowly amidst the funeral black of the screen as Houston narrated his lingering escape from the grave. One of the jammed Kino bits had popped loose again, but another had jammed in the meantime on the lower right. Sybil stifled a yawn. She's bored too. The star brightened slowly as Houston spoke about his entry into American politics, presenting as his motive the desire to help his persecuted pet Cherokees. This was exotic enough, Sybil thought, but at its heart lay the same snicky, humbugging politicians always talked, and the audience was growing restive. They would have liked more fighting or perhaps more poetic talk about life with the Cherokees. Instead, Houston had settled into a litany of his election to some rude equivalent of parliament, various obscure posts in provincial government, and all the while the star grew slowly, its edges branching elaborately, becoming the emblem of the government of Tennessee. Sybil's eyelids grew heavy. They fluttered while the general blustered on. And quite suddenly, Houston's voice and tone changed, becoming lingering and sentimental, a honey lilt creeping into his drawl. He was talking about a woman. Sybil sat up, straighter, listening. Houston had been elected governor, it seemed, and had gotten himself some tin, that's money, and been cheery about it. And he'd found himself a sweetheart, some Tennessee gentry girl, and married her. But on the Kino screen, fingers of darkness crept in, snake-like from the edges. They menaced the state seal. Governor and Mrs. Houston had scarcely settled in when wifey kicked over the traces and fled back to her family. She probably was so bored she needed to leave. She left him a letter, Houston said, a letter that contained an awful secret, a secret that he had never revealed and had sworn to carry to his grave, a private matter of which a gentleman of honor cannot and should not speak. Black disaster struck me. The newspapers, apparently they did have newspapers in Tennessee, had attacked him. The tattling mouths of libel poured their venom on me, Houston lamented as the Greek shield with the raven appeared and black Kino blobs mud, Sybil supposed, began to spatter it. Houston's revelations were shocking. He'd actually gone through with it and had divorced his wife, of all the unlikely, awful things. Of course, he's lost his position in government. Outraged society had hounded him from office, and Sybil wondered why Houston had dared to mention such an ugly scandal. It was as if he expected his London audience to morally approve of this divorced man. Still, she noticed, the ladies seemed intrigued and not entirely without sympathy, perhaps. Even the fat mama fluttered at her double chins with a fan. General Houston was a foreigner, after all, half a savage by his own account. But when he spoke of his wife, it was tenderly, as of a true love, a love slain by some cruel, mysterious truth. His bellowing voice broke with unashamed emotion. He mopped at his forehead a bit with a fancy handkerchief from his leopard skin vest. In truth, He wasn't a bad-looking cove, over 60, but that sort could be kinder to a girl. His confession seemed bold and manly, for he himself had brought the matter up, the divorce scandal and the secret letter from Mrs. Houston. He wouldn't stop talking about it, but neither would he tell them the secret. He'd pricked the curiosity of his audience, and Sybil herself was simply dying to know. She chided herself for being so cakey, for it was likely something stupid and simple, not half so deep and mysterious as he pretended. Likely his gentry girl wasn't half so angelic as she looked. Likely she'd had her maiden virtues stolen from her by some good-looking Tennessee beau trap long before Raven Houston came along. Men had hard rules for their brides, if never for themselves. Likely Houston had brought it all on himself. Perhaps he had beastly, vile ideas about married life, come from living with savages, or perhaps he'd milled his wife about with his fists, for Sybil fancied he'd be a right bully rock in his cups. Well, I think the wife left him out of pure boredom because he seems ridiculous. The Kino came alive with harpies meant to symbolize Houston's slanders, those who'd smeared his precious honor with the ink of a gutter press. Nasty, crooky-back things crowding the screen in devilish black and red, and as the screen whirred steadily, they twitched their cloven hooves. Never had she seen the like, some Manchester punch card artist having gotten the gin horror sure. Now Houston was ranting about challenges and honor, by which he meant dueling. Americans being most famous duelists who loved guns and shot each other at the drop of a hat. He'd have killed some of those newspaper rascals, Houston insisted loudly, if he hadn't been governor and on his dignity. So instead, he'd thrown in his cards and gone back to live with his precious Cherokees. He had a real head of steam up now. He'd stoked himself so. It was almost frightening to watch. The audience was entertained, their reserve broken by his bulging eyes and veiny Texian neck, but none too far from disgust. Maybe it had been something really dreadful that he'd done, Sybil thought, rubbing her hands together inside her rabbit skin muff. Maybe it was ladies' fever that he'd given his own wife a case of the glue. Some types of glue were horrible and could make you mad or blind or crippled. Maybe that was the secret. Mick might know. Very likely, Mick knew all about it. Houston explained that he had left the United States in disgust and gone to Texas, and that the word a map appeared, a sprawl of land in the middle of the continent. Houston claimed that he'd gone there seeking land for his poor, suffering Cherokee Indians, but it was all a bit confusing. Sybil asked the clerking fellow next to her for the time. Only an hour had passed. The speech was a third gone. Her moment was coming. Let's see, where are we? Okay, about 15 more minutes. You must envision a nation many times the size of your own home islands, said Houston, with no roads greater than the grassy tracts of Indians, without at that time a single mile of British railroad, and lacking the telegraph or indeed engine resources of any kind. As commander-in-chief of the Texian National Forces, my orders had no courier more swift or more reliable than the mounted scout, his way menaced by the Comanche and the Karankawa, by Mexican raiding parties, and by the thousand nameless hazards of the wilderness. Small wonder then that Colonel Travis should receive my orders too late and place his confidence tragically in the reinforcing party led by Colonel Fannin. Surrounded by an enemy force 50 times his own, Colonel Travis declared his objective to be victory or death, knowing full well that the latter was a surely fated outcome. The defenders of the Alamo perished to a man. The noble Travis, the fearless Colonel Bowie, and David Crockett, a very legend among frontiersmen. Messieurs Travis, Bowie, and Crockett each had a third of the Kino screen, their faces gone strangely square with the cramped scale of their depiction, brought precious time for my Fabian strategy. More soldier talk. Now he stepped back from the podium and pointed up at the Kino with his heavy polished cane. The forces of Lopez de Santa Anna were arrayed as you see them here, with the woods upon his left flank and the San Jacinto river marshes at his back. His siege engineers had dug in around the baggage train with emplacements of sharpened timber represented thusly. By a forced march through Burnham's Ford, however, my army of 600 had seized the wooded banks of Buffalo Bayou, unbeknownst to enemy intelligence. The assault began with a brick cannon fire from the Texian center. Now we can witness the movement of the Texian light cavalry. The shock of the foot charge sent the enemy reeling in confusion, throwing his artillery, which was not yet limbered, into utter disarray. The Kinotrope's blue squares and lozenges slowly chased the buckling red Mexican regiments through the checkered greens and whites of woods and swamps. Sybil shifted in her seat, trying to ease the chafing of her hoop skirt. Houston's bloodthirsty boasting was finally reaching a climax. The final count of the fallen numbered 2 Texian dead, 630 of the invader. The massacres of Alamo and Goliad were avenged in Santanista blood. 2 Mexican armies utterly defeated, with the capture of 14 officers and 20 cannon. 14 officers, 20 cannon. Yes, that was her cue. Her moment had come. Avenge us, General Houston, Sybil shrieked, her throat constricted with stage fright. She tried again, pulling herself to her feet, waving one arm. Avenge us, General Houston. Houston halted, taken aback. Sybil shouted at him shrilly, Avenge our honor, sir. Avenge Britain's honor. A babble of alarm rose. Sybil felt the eyes of the theater crowd all upon her, shocked looks that people might give a lunatic. My brother, she shouted, but fear had seized her and bad her nerves. That means her nerves were shot. She hadn't expected it to be so frightening. This was worse than singing on stage. Far worse. Houston lifted both his arms, the striped blanket spreading behind him like a cloak. Somehow he calmed the crowd by this gesture and asserted command. And above his head, the Kinotrope wound slowly down, its flickering domino tricks whirring to a stop, leaving San Jacinto frozen in mid-victory. Houston fixed Sybil with a look of mingled stemness and resignation. What is it, my dear young lady? What troubles you? Tell me. Sybil gripped the back of the seat before her and closed her eyes tight and sang it out. Sir, my brother is in a Texian prison. We are British, but the Texians imprisoned him, sir. They seized his farm and his cattle. They even stole the very railroad that he worked on, a British railroad built for Texas. Her voice was faltering despite herself. Now, Mick wouldn't like that. He would scold her performance. The thought put a jolt of vitality into her, so she opened her eyes. That regime, sir, the thieving Texian regime, they stole that British railroad. They robbed the workers in Texas and the stockholders here in Britain and paid us not a penny. With the loss of the Kinotrope's bright play of images, the theater's atmosphere had changed. Everything was quite different suddenly, oddly intimate and strange. It was as if she and the general were somehow framed together, 2 figures on a silver daguerreotype. A young London woman in her bonnet and elegant shawl reaches up with elegant distress to the old foreign hero, both part players now, with the surprised eyes of the public silently fixed on them. You suffered because of the junta, Houston said. Yes, sir, Sybil cried, a practiced quaver stealing into her voice. Don't frighten them, Mick had said, but make them pity you. Yes, the junta did it. They have flung my brother into their vile prison for no crime, sir, but simply because my dear brother is a Houston man. He voted for you when you became president of Texas, sir, and he would vote for you today, although I fear very much they will kill him. Well, what is your brother's name, my dear lady? Houston asked. Jones, sir, Sybil quickly cried. Edwin Jones of Nacogdoches, who worked for Hedgecox's Railway Company. I believe I know young Edward, Houston declared, his surprise evident in his tone. He clutched his cane angrily in his heavy brows. nodded. Listen to her, Sam, came a sudden, deep voice, and Sybil, alarmed, turned to look. It was the man from the Argyle rooms, the fat actor, with his red hair and brushed velvet waistcoat. Those Hunter rascals appropriated the Hedgecock's Railroad, a pretty business that, from a supposed British ally. Is this the gratitude they show for years of British guidance and protection? He sat back down. They're nothing but thieves and villains, Sybil shouted alertly. She groped quickly in memory, picking up the thread. General Houston, I'm a defenseless woman, but you're a man of destiny, a man of greatness. Can there be justice for Texas, sir? Some redress for those affronts? Must my poor brother die there in misery while cheats and tyrants steal our British property? It's kind of like listening to the Republicans talk about immigrants. But Mick's fine rhetoric was drowned. There were shouts from the audience here and there over a muttered undertone of surprise and approval. Loud, boyish hooting came from the penny gallery. A bit of London fun, all told. Perhaps Sybil thought she had made some of them believe her story and pity her. Most simply howled and joked a bit, pleased to see some unexpected liveliness. Sam Houston was always a true friend of Britain, Sybil shrieked into the crowd's upturned faces. The words half lost, useless, she raised the back of her wrist to her damp forehead. Oh. Mick had given her no more lines, so she let the strength seep from her legs and fell back, her eyes fluttering and half sinking into her seat. Well, give Miss Jones some air, Houston commanded, an excited bellow. The lady is overcome. Sybil watched through half-closed lids as blurred figures haltingly gathered around her. Dark evening jackets, a rustle of crinoline, gardenia perfume, and a masculine smell of tobacco. A man seized her wrist and felt for a pulse there with pinching fingers, and a woman fanned Sybil's face, clucking to herself. Oh, heavens, Sybil thought, shrinking. The fat mama from the row before her, with that intolerable oily look of a good woman doing her moral duty. Ugh. A little thrill of shame and disgust shot through her. For a moment, she felt genuinely weak, sinking with a battery ease into the warmth of their concern, a half dozen busybodies muttering around her in a shared pretense of competence, while Houston thundered on above them, hoarse with indignation. A couple more minutes. Sybil allowed them to get her to her feet. Houston hesitated, seeing it, and there was a light, gallant scatter of applause for her. She felt pale and unworthy. She smiled wanly and shook her head and wished she were invisible. She leaned her head on the padded shoulder of the man who had taken her pulse. Sir, if I could go, please, she whispered. Her rescuer nodded alertly, a little fellow with clever blue eyes. His long graying hair was parted in the middle. I shall see the lady home, he piped at the others. He shrugged into an opera cape, perched a tall beaver hat on his head, and lent her his arm. They walked together up the aisle, Sybil leaning on him heavily, unwilling to meet anyone's eyes. The crowd was roused now. For the first time, perhaps, they were listening to Houston as a man rather than as some sort of queer American exhibit. Her little gentleman held dingy velvet aside for her as they emerged from the Garrick's chilly foyer with its flaking gilt cubits and damp-marked faux marble walls. "'Tis very kind of you, sir, to help me so," Sybil offered, noting that her escort looked as though he might have money. "Are you a medical man?" "Well, I was a student once," he said with a shrug. His cheeks were flushed, twin hot points of red. "It gives a man a certain air of distinction," Sybil said. Nor for any particular purpose, but just to fill the silence, she said, "Schooling of that sort, I mean." "Hardly, madam. I wasted all my time versifying. I must say that you seem fit enough now. I'm very sorry to hear about that unfortunate brother of yours." "Well, thank you, sir." Sybil looked at him sidelong. "I'm afraid it was very forward of me, but General Houston's eloquence just carried me away." He shot her an opaque glance, the look of a man who suspects that a woman is gulling him. "In all honesty," he said, "I do not entirely share your enthusiasm." And he coughed explosively into a wadded handkerchief and wiped his mouth. "This London air will be the death of me." Nonetheless, I do thank you, sir, though I regret we've not been introduced. Keats, he said, Mr. Keats. He drew a ticking silver chronometer from his waistcoat, a many-dialed thing the size of a small potato, and consulted it. I'm not familiar with the district, he said distantly. I thought to hail you a cabriolet, but at this hour, oh no, Mr. Keats, thank you, but I shall go by the underground. His bright eyes widened. No respectable woman rode the underground unescorted. But you haven't told me your profession, Mr. Keats, she said, hoping to distract him. Kinotropy, Keats said. The techniques employed here tonight are of some special interest. While the screen's resolution is quite modest and the refresh rate positively slow, remarkable effects have been secured. One presumes through algorithmic compression, but I fear that is all a bit technical. He put away his chronometer. Are you entirely certain you wouldn't rather I attempted to hail you a cab? Do you know London well, Miss Jones? I might escort you to the local omnibus stand. 'Tis a railless carriage, you see. No, sir, thank you. You've been exceptionally kind. You're quite welcome, he said, his relief evident as he opened and held one of the half-glass doors to the street. Just then a skinny boy sidled rapidly up behind them, brushed past, and out of the theater without a word. He was draped in a long, dirty coat of canvas, something a fisherman might wear. A singular thing to wear to a lecture, Sybil thought, though one saw queerer garments on the poor. The sleeves flapped emptily as though the boy were hugging himself against a chill, perhaps. His gait was odd and bent back as if he were drunk or ill. I say there, young man, Mr. Keats had produced a coin, and Sybil understood that he wished the boy to hail a cab for her. But now the wet eyes gleamed at them with alarm, the pale face hollowed by gaslight. Suddenly he bolted, something dark tumbling from beneath his coat, where it rolled into the gutter. The boy halted and looked warily back at them. He'd dropped a hat, a top hat. He came trotting back, eyes still on them, snatched it up, stuffed it under his coat, and off again into the shadows, though this time not nearly so rapidly. Upon my word, Mr. Keats said in disgust, that fellow's a thief. That waterproof is stuffed with the hats of the audience. Sybil could think of nothing to say. I imagine the rascal took cruel advantage of that commotion you caused, Keats told her, his tone lightly etched with suspicion. Pity. One never knows who to trust these days. Sir, I do believe I hear the engine getting up steam for the kinotrope. And that was enough for him. Okay, so I'm going to stop there. We are at the 1 hour mark. That's a good place to stop. I hope you've enjoyed this so far. And I will definitely see you next Friday for the continuation of this story. I hope you're enjoying it. My shirt, by the way, says, let me get the microphone out of the way. My shirt says momentary blissness. It's a line from a song from the band we saw on Monday. And the band is called Fontaines DC. So check them out if you get a chance to ever do that. We saw them in New Orleans, and then so that was on Monday, and then the previous Friday, which was a week ago today, we actually saw another band in New Orleans called Arcade Fire, and I'd seen them in the past, but they were a little disappointing this time around. Not as authentic. They lost their edge. They peaked probably about, 20 years ago, maybe. And, they kind of held on for another 10 years after that, but they definitely lost their edge. But that's okay. We still had a good time in New Orleans. It was still a great trip. And then we went back on Monday for Fontaines DC, which they're a band from Dublin, Ireland, and they have not lost their edge. They are incredible performers, and I would really recommend checking them out if you get a chance. Okay. We will see you next Friday. Have a great weekend, everybody. Thank you for your support. Thanks for tuning in. I'm thoroughly enjoying this rewriting of history with this book, The Difference Engine. And I think in one of the editions, there was a forward written by Cory Doctorow. It says right here, I don't have that edition, but I would love to get my hands on that. So I'm sure you guys have heard of that. Maybe next week, I'll talk more about Cory Doctorow and who he is. Anyway, have a great weekend. See you next Friday. Bye.